Hey, everybody. Welcome to the new season of Net of Love podcast. And I am here with Ahmed El Feqy, who has been coming into my world very gently and slowly over time through social media. And I've been following him and his beautiful work and his beautiful trips to sacred sites. And there's so much to you I could never say in just, a paragraph. So
Thank
I am going to introduce you and just a really beautiful opportunity. We divinely in divine time came together for this beautiful podcast. I had just come back from Egypt, and Ahmed grew up in Egypt, and he has just gone to one of the most beautiful sacred sites in France. So we're going to talk about very connected into the Magdalene energies and those pieces as well, and the Cathars. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, and I will turn it right over to you just to talk about who you are. And again, we'll never get who you are in this podcast, but we'll get a
Great
little
question.
glimpse of that, right? Yeah.
Thanks, Amanda. Thanks for having me. It's beautiful to connect and share for the first time and go live right away. Like, I think it's for the first time person, I think that says something a lot about the connection. It's just like the divine bringing us together. So here we are. I'm Ahmed. Hello, everyone. I grew up in Egypt, lived there most of my life, and then I started living abroad. I lived in Germany, in Berlin, and in New York, and Peru, and California, and back in Germany and Iceland. And I'm all over the place. I lead sacred journeys to the temples around the planet. I have a travel company called Stargate Tours. And I've been doing these sacred pilgrimages for professionally for about 13 years. But before that, I was doing it just because I love it and people were coming along. It started in Egypt. I was just felt a strong connection to spirit, to the divine, and I was getting the Neteru, the Egyptian natural forces, beings personified as gods and goddesses. And I could see them in the sky, literally, and I could see these like ancient Egyptian visions were coming to me. So I was like, okay, well, this must be normal, but it wasn't. And
Maybe
I
it
just
will be
started,
someday for everyone, right?
it is now.
Yeah, that's my hope.
um, Exactly. And so I just started going to the temples, sitting, meditating by myself, and it started like opening to me. There was this like living transmission at the temples, at the sacred sites, very high potent energy and like a spiritual connection. And it started bringing this, like activating my own genetic memory and connection to these places from other lifetimes. I was getting recollections of like Atlantis, Lemuria, like High Priest of Ra. And these timelines were just like coming together online, like overlays as I'm walking through the desert into the temples. And I was like, wow, this is really incredible. And I could see, like, feel a connection to the Great White Solar Brotherhood, the White Lodge, and like these ascended masters beyond the veil. And I was like, okay, well, this is powerful. I did that underground for many years on my own, just going hardcore mystic until I started like branching out to find like the international community, people like on a similar path. And it led me to the elders, to the wisdom keepers living by the Sphinx in Egypt. Started with Abdul Hakim Awiyan. He was a great teacher, master, spiritual guide, and he lived by the Sphinx. And we connected right away. We became very good brothers. He started sharing with me about the oral tradition from the matriarchy, from the grandmother, from the prehistoric, pre-dynastic ancient Egypt during the golden age of Egypt before written history. So before history was distorted and indoctrinated, and everyone certain agendas were put in to tell us that this is our history, which wasn't. And that oral tradition matched my inner knowing, my gnosis, and this is how it started. And I saw this kind of link, this bridge, like a place where I needed to fill as an Egyptian gatekeeper, guardian of the sacred knowledge to bring people authentically into it, which was my natural path. And that's how I started my travel company, Stargate Tours. But I also studied law and philosophy, and I was a drummer in a band. I was like fully into music, rock and roll, and yeah, just living the whole life with a full spectrum. My family are judges, lawmakers. That's how I got into the law, but I was like a natural mystic. So I was kind of just balancing both worlds. And that's been my reality, like how to ground that spirituality in a physical sense day to day that actually works and allows us to thrive and stay in balance. And this has been a gift, a great gift to receive and to be able to balance these two realities that are seemingly like I literally saw a missing link. I was like, okay, what we're doing now, what we're doing back then, what happened? And I was like the gap. And I was like, okay, I'm going to be that bridge. So I became that bridge in many ways. And I started also like Skywalker healings. It's healing practice that I offer to connect people with their divinity through higher self activations. And literally, I see it as a bridge to heaven and earth, like basically going into the higher dimensions and bringing that current again in the physical. Connecting with our soul, with our oversoul, with our avatar Christ, with our Rishi, with our ascended master, and bringing all these aspects of self in the presence, fully online, here now. And that's embodiment of the fullness of who we are. So that's been my work. And I went and trained with shamans in Peru and worked with plant medicine for some time, leading ceremonies in the mountains, at the temples. Part of the sacred journeys, I would always bring the elders and the wisdom keepers and do ceremony with them and open the field with the group and starting pilgriming through these sites and receiving the gifts of each place. So I received direct instructions from Spirit to do this. It was like, okay, go to the sacred sites, do ceremonies during the times of celestial alignments, bridge them, connect one to the other, bring the gifts, carry them around. And I was just weaving, going Mount Shasta, Sacred Valley, Lake Titicaca, Machu Picchu, and back, and then to Egypt, and then Mexico, and then, Iceland and Europe. And I ended up recently in Monsegur, which is Stargate 12. So there are different stargates on the planet that connect to the original 12 angelic humans that carried the 12-strand DNA. And each tribe was assigned one stargate, one holy place that was like, they were the guardians of it. These are like kind of ascension gates that like access to the higher realms. And Monsegur happens to be Stargate number 12 with Cathars, who is the authentic lineage of the Christ. Basically, Yeshua and Mary Magdalene, this is their lineage. This is the most authentic Christian sect on the planet that got completely, they burned them to the stake. It got completely wiped out, and that happens in the 13th century. And there was a prophecy of their return 700 years from then, 777 years as well, which happens to be right now. Yeah. So, yeah.
And it's so beautiful, but the mass genocide that occurred to these people carrying this Christ light lineage and teaching it is profound. And that's some of what you earlier said so beautifully about Egypt. The true teachings got lost and distorted. And there's so many people that think or see Egypt and think of fear and think of some of those dark magic energies that were happening at some points during those really fallen times. But you, like me, have been trained by the elder shamans in the land of Chem, of divine love, of what it meant to fully be in unity consciousness. And we have this memory in ourselves. And I love the work you're doing because it's so closely tied to the work that I'm doing. It's probably in the same stream, becoming that pillar of grounding, crowned and grounded heaven to earth, and holding that stream as a vessel and a channel for this beautiful work. And my teacher, elder shaman, lives near Mount Shasta. So she I'll have her on here probably this season too. And she's worked so closely with the Neteru, and she has supported me in my stream with it as well. And I had experiences where I wouldn't necessarily see them, but I feel them and I know the frequency of which one is with me. And it's very connected. You know this, you talked about it with the genetics and the codons, the Neteru. That's why the Neteru are so important. They're the natures of divinity that hold this entire construct together. And the beautiful part about the openings that occur when we begin to work with those energies is phenomenal. And that's, I believe, what Christ and Mary were doing. They were
Yeah.
connected into those lineages, and they knew that, but you're right, it got so distorted into people being afraid of it. So they can't access it because they've been so afraid of it. They think it's wrong or bad, but it's the temples under the temples that we're talking about that are rising again. It's the true revelations, which doesn't have to be scary at all.
It's absolutely true. And it's cool that you say the temples underneath the temples, because this is a theme uh, in Egypt and in Monsegur and in a lot of the places, like even in Peru. You see the most recently built temples are built on top of older temples that are built on top of older temples that are going into like our prehistory. And there was obviously a kind of like an awakened, ascended civilization that seeded these temples, these sacred sites, in according to the universal laws and in harmony with nature, and worked with these divine principles and creative forces, and consecrated these energies in the sacred space. And then the cultures that came later built upon that, and they became, these centers of light, these temples, and civilization grew around that. And the initiates, the high priesthood, were the keepers of these like grail mysteries and natural divine orders that continue the ceremonies and the practice to continue bridging that energy, that current from source into the earth, into society. And the infiltrations that happened, were like dark agendas trying to siphon that energy for their own use and harvest life force instead of like this like eternal regenerative current that was for everyone. And this is where the distortions happen, the manipulation of history and creating the fear around it, because the fear was the tool for the manipulation. And the distortion of the truth was also the tool for the manipulation. So it's important going back to these places and learning from the others and learning from our own direct gnosis, direct knowledge and experience of the divine at the sacred sites and wherever we are, to bring back that knowledge. And that's basically what the Christ worked with. What the Christ is not just Yeshua, it's also a divine principle. It's the Son of God. And when I say that, it's not just Son as a child, but also the Sun as a star, as a frequency, as this like Christic fire, gold of creation.
That we hold within us too.
Exactly. And both masculine and feminine, and so there were always the ascended beings came in pairs, and like all the history and the creation stories was like these pairs, these couples like Isis, Osiris, or whoever in different cultures just showed up out of nowhere and started teaching people. Basically, that's kind of what's coming back again as we establish our own inner marriage with Source, with the divine, and like one interesting piece was the original baptism that Mary Magdalene did was to unite the person with their etheric double. And that's like entering the bridal chamber. And that's that level of union is the level of embodiment that is required now to fully bring the full impact and the presence of our divinity. That's pretty deep, we can go into this
I'm so
more.
glad you're bringing this in because this is where my whole season is going this year.
Yeah, all right.
So this
Well,
is
that's why we're
beautiful.
having this conversation. Yeah.
Absolutely. And you think of the Shiva Shakti energy, right? And the Mary Yeshua energies. And like you said, the Isis Osiris energies, they were this, from the original unity consciousness descended off into different lineages to teach the same aspect of inner unity consciousness, which is sacred relationship with self, with the divine. And the beautiful aspect that you're talking about, some people will use the term twin flame. I think we need a new a new
I think
word
it
for
got
that.
distorted, hijacked like everything else. Yeah.
Absolutely. But the beautiful part about the twin flame understanding is it's your twin flame relationship with the divinity. And that's what brings in the bridegroom. Your inner feminine and inner masculine has united the divinity of them. And now you have this outer divine counterpart that is your ultimately for me it would be my divine masculine feminine in another being that I'm experiencing. And that's the in Egypt from my trainings, that's the Hathor, that's the
Right.
Heru coming into,
Yeah.
that's the Christ
Yeah.
consciousness in the being that you're now experiencing that aspect of yourself in another, which is sacred relationship. But it's so mirroring your own stuff. So whatever stuff you have, you're going to experience it because it's God talking to you. It's your Godness talking back to you. And that beautiful sacred relationship is so divine because it's so pure, it's so unconditional, it's so loving, but it is a reflection of the unity that you're holding within you. And it doesn't happen until you get to a certain point where you're holding that unity, if one chooses. I'd love to
It's
hear what you have to say about it.
a high level avatar mastery training because, like, we can have that inner union and we can have the union in the partnership, but ultimately it's about union in general. And on that level, it's like your union with all of creation. And to come to that level, because the embodiment is of these primordial cosmic creative forces straight from source, like the masculine divine principle as primordial powers, impersonal, but then they become personified. And on one level you have your etheric double, right, which is like kind of like yourself in the antimatter universe, let's say that, or like in the invisible. And when you integrate that, you're in contact with the invisible, which is everything behind what we see. And to bring that fully and walk in that remembrance, walk in remembrance of Heavenly Father and the Divine Mother, and be the conduit of these forces in everything you do, because it's not just about relationship and service, it's in everything you do. It's about full, complete absorption in that current, that you become that current. That's the grail current. And that what rebirth is the Christ, that what rebirth is the avatar that changes life, because you're in service to life and you're one with life. There's no separation. And that's unity consciousness. And the mirroring part and the challenges is because we really need to dissolve everything to become just a pure empty vessel of that current. So whatever that's on the way, it's going to be burnt. And that's good because it needs to be burned, purified, dissolved in that current, which is a higher Christic fire. And it's also fire and water. And it's incredible.
Rising like the phoenix out of it. Yeah, of the ashes of it. Yeah.
The Phoenix Dragon.
Yeah, Isis. Yeah, it's really beautiful. And the greatest lessons that I've learned on this path with sacred relationship is that it's always your divine source connection that is the beauty of this flow. And when we no longer have buttons that can be pushed and we are fully riding the wave of of divinity, the things that occur, the moments that happen are beyond what you or I could ever describe in this
It's the
podcast.
primal power. I mean, this is where the sacred rapture comes in. And
Yes.
it's a balancing act too, because I feel like in sense of the masculine principle, holding the guardianship for the divine feminine to thrive and just flow and nourish and like rise. Um, that requires the man to be in touch with super sensitive and subtle aspects of creation, reality, and everyone around them and everything around them, to be that receptive, holding power, and also that active principle that um, seeds life with that receptivity from the higher source, with like the will of God. And that's an aspect that also requires an absolute surrender from both sides and can reveal these vulnerable parts. Like, how do we go in fully into these parts and be held in that safety and allow us to be like seated by God, by the divine will? That's an artwork, and I guess that's what's
Mm.
being trained in the mystery schools, and like that's what we're being trained into, because it is a primal power and is a primal life force. Um, and it's so intense that it requires gentleness to be able to wield it and direct it with integrity.
Mm.
And that's where, it's not accessible to everyone until they fully pass through the initiations and enter a level of adeptship and mastery that they can wield it without misusing it, because it's dangerous otherwise, and it could hurt. And not to create fear around it, but actually to bring awareness and self-responsibility of how we carry ourselves with that power. Because I see on one level, there's a lot of talk around it and a lot of amazing concepts and understanding, but like to fully embody that, it goes beyond the words, and it has to be an energetic frequency that um, embodies in the being and becomes an emanation. And that's when we really enter the holy of the holy and the inner sanctum together, and that's whew,
It's a
beyond
whole
words.
new level of love that this planet, their birthright is to be able to experience that.
It's
And
wanting it, and it's
yeah,
happening.
yeah,
Yeah.
and it is. It's coming, and people are going to learn it. And I said this in my last podcast too. It's like the judgment scene in the book of Coming Forth by Day, of the feather being weighed against the heart. And if your heart is as light as a feather and you are loving another as God would love another, if you're loving yourself as God loves you, that is embracing unity, divine consciousness. And it, like you said, it comes with presence and integrity because it is God's love. It is fully being able to hold. And you said so beautifully some of the divine masculine characteristics, and the divine feminine characteristics are really about that divine mother of holding, of being able to hold the person in that way as a divine mother would, so gently, so lovingly, like you're holding the baby in the womb. That is the womb, like Niet, that is the womb of the mother, of the darkness, of the abyss. And we can talk about that a little bit too, because
We can dissolve in the abyss.
we can dissolve in
No
the
more.
abyss and fully become one with all in that
Yeah.
sacred relationship, which is energetically the most beautiful things can happen there. And that kind of got a bad rap for a long time, being when people refer to aspects as darkness as being evil. Evil is evil. Darkness is that womb, that dark matter, that that abyss. So
The
it
void.
language is really important in these concepts as well.
The void. I like the expression of the
Yeah.
void, because like the pure nothing that is everything.
Yeah.
Undifferentiated, like primal potential life force, just infinite energy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the light being the photonic information of the more of that masculine principle that comes into creation, but it's always weaving and moving, and they both have aspects of each other the whole time.
Well, it's like sound and light, it's like vibration and frequency, contraction, expansion, these like two
Yeah,
currents that are constantly creating, moving, creating electromagnetism and sparks and like trinities, vorticing, like,
right. Like
uh,
the poles. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. It's
yeah.
beautiful work. And then when we start to embody that same geometry, those same torus fields, those same those same divine currents, again, and you use the word dangerous, and you're absolutely right. And that's why ascension is like a ladder, and you come up on the next rung each time, because it is a process, because you have to, each time you come into a new frequency that your body's not used to before, you have to integrate that and come into resonance with that. That's the Stargate ascension that, that Ahmed and I are talking about. And
Totally.
your art needs to come into resonance with that in order to get to the next Stargate. And it's a beautiful process, but it is a process, and it's a healing process to heal all that was distorted and all the false knowledge.
And let's beautifully said, and let's talk about that in relation to my experience at Monsegur, because
Yeah.
that's very relevant to what you're saying. Um, I just knew it was Stargate number 12, and it was the Cathars stronghold, southern France, and
Mm.
I live in Germany. I started driving there. And on my way, I felt this. I don't think I've thought about it before, but it felt like the Lamb of God. And it just a presence that came over me, and I felt like this super white fluffy energy, and like completely peaceful, like harmless, like just driving in that peace and exalted field. And I got there, it was raining, and I got there, and it was like midnight, and it started snowing, and there was no one awake in the village. Everything shut down. It's winter. It was a winter wonderland, absolute beauty. Just walked out there by myself in the snow on the village, in the mountain, by the site. You know, there's a castle there up on that mountain on the Stargate, and I was just in this like bliss space, and I had plan B to go to the next B&B like on the way up. So I went down and I went to it, and I entered the space. It was a beautiful summer house. It used to be a school for the kids to come. That was part of the church, so there was a chapel there, and the current owners have it dedicated at the Notre Dame of Sophia.
Mm.
Stumbled upon it, went in, incredible altar, sacred space devoted to the divine feminine, and having the Christ holding the field also. And it just brought a lot of joy to my heart that I went to that space spontaneously, because the whole mystery about that place, the area in Pyrenees with the Cathars, was like the pilgrimage of Mary Magdalene from Egypt, and from Jerusalem, and from whatever that happened there, the story, the true story, what happened there, her coming, whether on her own or with like disciples or even with Yeshua himself, and pilgriming, through these places. She was called to it. She was pulled. It was a gravitational pull, and I think it's the same pull that brought me back to it. And there's so many mysteries that are being rebirthed now in that area. And I mean, pilgrims have been going for thousands of years, but right now it's time of the prophecy and the return. And for some reason, it's coming more online. So a lot was revealed to me there. One aspect was that like it's two tectonic plates, the Euro-Asian and the Iberian tectonic plates, both crashed in that place, in that area. So there's a lot of tectonic forces and natural forces that come together in that valley within the mountains, and there are anomalies in the field. So there's Mountain Bugarash at the entrance that's upside down. Geologically, the top part of the mountain is older than the lower part, than the base of the mountain. And it's a lot of UFO sightings, a lot of like inner earth connections and caves and just anomalies. And then ends in Monsegur, which is kind of like the crown energy. And I felt a lot of crown activation there. So bringing back to being in that place, they told me there's a fountain of joy just behind the house that I went to. And it was like the shape of the yoni within the rock in the mountains, and water gushing out of it, and a statue of Mary just right there. And that water is coming from behind the mountain, from beyond Monsegur, and going underneath the house and creating a pool. And so I immediately sensed it as like really holy water, and I approached it with that reverence, and I could feel the emanations coming out. And I was told to go in, so I went in, and it was freezing cold. It was snowing, and it was a shock to my body. And I went out right away, but then I went back in, and as I approached it, I was just received by the spirit like Shekinah. Like you can call it Shekinah, you can call it Sophia, you can call it the Holy Spirit, but that presence came over, and it really like slowed me down to walk gently and just, you know.
You can't explain it. But I totally know what you mean.
You can feel it.
Right with you feeling that beautiful moment. Yeah.
Like just walking step by step slowly into the water, going in, and the sun, standing in the sun, hitting me, going into the water through me, and just receiving the sun in the water, facing Mary in the gushing water. And then when I felt that like full absorption of the sun and in me, I was thrown in the water, like something pushed me in the water. My feet was just in half, so I was half in the water, but I was like thrown in, and I had my baptism with spirit there, and that was just before going up to the mountain. So I drove up after that, and it was just a joy and remembrance to see it for the first time coming back. And Yeah, just talking about it, thinking about it right now, my crown gets activated
Mine
because
is too.
yeah, I got a serious
Maybe
crown
we're feeling each other.
activation.
There's like dancing
Yeah,
party up here happening.
yeah, talking about the halo and the solar Christ. I mean, we're getting into that. That's where
The
it's leading.
console's opening up. Yeah.
Oh
So beautiful.
my God. And so basically the Cathars were communing with that energy. That it's a bridge. It's a bridge to the heavens. And they lived on the top there, and it was their last stronghold because it's an intense story. And basically, as the most pure sect in Christianity, they saw the corruption in the church, in the Catholic Roman Church to be precise, and they did not follow that indoctrination, and they created their own uh, pure practice that their initiates were called the perfecti, which means the perfected ones. And so they didn't care much about material possession, although they were rich, they were like royalty there, you know, it was a castle. But that whole area, which is Occitan, I don't know how you pronounce it, was like its own independent part of France, kind of like Catalonia next to it in Spain. They were their independent people. They have their own language, and these were like where Mary Magdalene went and had the maybe she was pregnant, you know, and then or maybe she had Yeshua with her, but basically the lineage came through them and was seated there and continued their pure teachings from the Christ originally. And it had to do with purity, you know. That's why my first initiation there was the purification with the water, because that's how we enter the sanctity of spirit. And that's the most important step. That's the first step for any true adeptship, to enter that space. Yeah. And that's where the ignition happens, because this is where the divine current starts running through us, you know, and shoots through the crown, because it activates, you know, on a primal base level, our life force liberated, and our sexuality and our essence and our physicality purified, and then goes into the heart, sacred fire, sacred heart, I want to say illuminate, but we're getting to the illumination, but this is also an illumination, right? Because the heart illumination like makes you one with everything, and there's literally this sacred fire, right, that just like ignites like a star, like the core of each star, right? And that just shoots up through the crown like a supernova and just expands into the cosmos, and you become that living fountain of eternal youth. You become that current, that tree of eternal life, and your roots seated in the earth, grounded, rooted, and your crown just extended to the cosmos, to the heavens, uniting with God, Father, Source, Spirit, the universe, and bringing that current back and forth. So it's moving back and forth, you know, and that's the embodiment on that level that allows the true mystery to reveal itself constantly, to be reborn in every moment, to be a living transmission of the Holy Temple within and without. And that's the level of communion that we're talking about. That's the pure manna from heavens, you know, that's the Eucharist. That's everything and nothing, and it's beyond words. And it's right there. And I was just initiated into it simply by that presence. And going up there, I could feel that presence again. And I was like, wow, okay, sat with it, received it, and went through the space. Incredible view on top of the mountain, everything like just beyond words. And went back down and was awoken again in the middle of the night by the presence of Sophia from the water, from that transmission, channeled into a poem that was just, and I shared it with the guardians of the place the next day and received an ordination from Sophia, from the Reverend, beautiful, amazing gatekeeper guardian, Alethea, who lives there. And, you know, that's how it started for me. So that was a profound start to begin with. And I had just received a transmission from the Christ between the paws of the Sphinx before going there. It was an amazing group journey, completion between the paws of the Sphinx with a ceremony, with powerful alchemy and this white pillar just came all the way through me and like into the earth, and I felt the presence of the Christ and this like huge white solar angel, and it was such an energy to behold. And it just started activating everything around me, and I just started working with people with a group, and we were all in it, dissolved. And when we walked out of the space, I could feel that current move out of me into the like the crystalline grid of the planet. And um, that's what guided me to Monsegur. So it's almost like the heart meets the crown, because one way to see the Egypt and that Stargate there, number 4 as the heart chakra, and there I feel the crown, and it was just like this union energy that happened. And again, that's also the union of the masculine and the feminine. Um, and like what I'm receiving from that transmission is that, the Christ consciousness is also a technology, and a Christ grid, a crystalline grid that goes into the planet and the ley lines in the universe. And it's just like the sacred architecture, metaphysical architecture of heaven and the earth unified. And it's like it comes through our body and moves into the field. And so going, communing with that energy and bringing it and walking the earth and spreading it is part of the message, or part of the restoration. And so that's what's been happening. And I was given, I met another elder gatekeeper, gong master that night, and he shares with me the transmission of the 7 holy sites in that valley, starting from Bugaj, ending with Monsegur. So I go visit them, and that same presence just kept on coming. In the high points where there's a chateau, and like they're usually made of fire and connecting with fire signals, and they were like, you can feel it from each point, it's connecting to the other points, and it's the high point. And so I went to all of them, and I could just feel that presence, and just bringing bliss and joy and love out of nowhere. I'm just sitting there by myself, blissing out, and I'm like, what's going on? And so it was like parts of my soul and my knowing, my gnosis, was just coming back fully online from that encounter of these places. And I knew it, it's the same energy Christ and Magdalene worked with. And it's the same energy that called me there. And it's the same energy that is now rebirthing on the planet. And as stewards, guardians, gatekeepers, like lovers of the mystery, and bringers of this love, fully. And I
Bringers of the
feel,
dawn. Yeah.
I feel this intense beauty, and also a sense of just, it's a sublime mystery, and it goes beyond words, but there's like a required a kind of guardianship, because it's sensitive. It's like a newborn baby. It's super powerful, but at the same time, it's like any newborn energy, it needs to be held with that reverence and that grace. And it's so easy to people kind of assume and project and bring their thing into it, but this thing doesn't need anything into it. It just needs everything else to step out of the way to allow it. And so that's where the guardian is like, we just allow it, and hold that space. And that's what I've been learning. And receiving the transmission to go there in the solstice and do a gathering, a 10-day like immersion into that frequency and into that work, and going taking people on the same initiatory sequence to know it and experience it for themselves, because it's such a great gift. This is what I'm doing.
Yeah, and it's such a unique inner process that we have. And I want to thank you profoundly for that beautiful channel that came through as you're explaining that. I could feel the Christos energies coming through your body. And if anybody watching this had some root activations or some energetic feelings that were happening as Ahmed was talking about that process, I was seeing the energy of that moving, and I can see how that may be affecting some people that might be watching this podcast. So we always talk about, as as the ones holding this energy, that it's not always our business how people are impacted by it. It's the divine love that's flowing through the body that they receive to where they need to receive it, and we're just the vessel for it. And you explained that so divinely and so beautifully with the power of your word. on that full process of fully holding that in the being and having that grounded into the earth. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
And I wanted to just go back to something you said earlier that's always resonated very deeply for me about was Yeshua with Mary, for example. And even in the Bible, it talks about what the resurrected body looks like. And it's a
Yeah.
fleshy light body. It's a fleshy light body.
Mhm.
And there are different, you know this, I'm speaking to the choir, there are different dimensional resonances of reality that we can connect to depending on our ascension and depending on where our body, vehicle, cosmic spaceship is resonating, what frequencies it's resonating at, to be able to experience um, different kind of beings. Like in the beginning, you talked about being able to see the netters. I had a really beautiful experience in Egypt in one of the tombs for the first time seeing one of the netters, like seeing it. I've always felt it. I've always worked with that energy, but I actually saw Ma'at, and my heart just, and one of the examples that you explained in Monsegur, I had that at Dendera when I first walked onto that land, and it's those ancient energies, the temples under the temples we're talking about. That energy came through my body so profoundly, and I just felt myself grounding it in and sharing it. And like you said, it just goes in through the grids, and you can feel the energy going out through the grids. And it's you know it's not something that can be explained in words, but when you have these moments, it is this gnosis, it's this all knowing that you are connecting into the divine temple that has always been within you, and that body temple. So thank you again. You said that so beautifully and so profoundly the way you were explaining that. So thank you. Is there anything else that you would like to share
Oh,
before
there is
we
a
wrap
lot.
up?
We've shared a part, but the only thing that I would like to add right now is the, this whole initiation for me has been bringing fully online the presence of the Christ on an internal, intimate, like connection, communication, presence. And I did not expect this. In a way, I've been having it all my life, but it got really accelerated with that experience, and it blew my mind, blew me away because it was like so strong and real and present and visual, like I could feel it with my all my senses. Um, and I'm still integrating it, but what I'm learning is that the more we focus and cultivate that energy, it grows, and that's what it means to really the return, the second coming. Like I feel it through that work, and I'm just gonna stop right there. um, yeah,
Yeah. And I talked about that in my other podcast about the second coming, and the second coming is happening through all of us. The Christos through all of our bodies, that's what they were trying to show us, is that within all of us. We were all those angelic humans at one point when we forgot who we were. And the Yeshua ben Joseph wrote rose into, he was holding that Christ consciousness, and it's a consciousness paradigm, it's a resonance with that divine consciousness. And we have that within our DNA potentiality to open up to that and hold that. But as you said so beautifully before, it's a gentle process that occurs, but it's one of the greatest loves we could never communicate or dream of or imagine. It just flows to you when you start coming into these resonances so profoundly and so beautifully. And these beautiful relationships and these people that you find, it's like magnets. We all magnetize to each other when you're like, if you think about it, like think of all the different resonances you've kind of held in your life, and the people that were around you in those resonances. And the more we come into these other resonances, the more these divine beings come into our reality, and and that's what the new earth is. That's what we're living. That's what we're experiencing and feeling. And like you said, at these sacred sites, these people that end up around you while you're having these experiences are some of the most divine people you could never imagine. But we also have to remember that it's also a result because it's emanating from our divinity, that these people are in our field.
It's a field of oneness and remembrance because on one level it's happening on multiple planes simultaneously and multiple timelines, and the soul just remembers when the eye meets the eye and the heart meets the heart, and just the soul recognizes, and that opens the transmission on a deeper level because together, coming together, we consecrate that energy together, and it grows, it expands. We create these clusters of light that just emanate higher and grow bigger, and that communion also with the Christ is on the inner planes, and it opens these like channels of communication with God, with the divine, with the Christ beings everywhere. And this is, I feel, is the grid that we're forming, but we're also receiving it in our bodies and in our awareness, and then working through the alchemy of the transfiguration of it to really bring it all the way into that immortal body or eternal life. And so that's pretty deep, and we can talk about that next time.
Yeah, and really quick, just to add on to that, that new earth consciousness, outer emanation that we're seeing unfold like a flower blossoming before us. Like you said, we're forming it, but it's also source divinity already, it's already been formed, but it's being formed through us in the
Yeah,
physical. It's already there, it's always been there.
yeah,
But yeah.
it's like it's coming back online in this plane to really be a reality again for everyone, and it's through these experiences that it filters through to become more present.
And the more
Yeah,
we surrender, the more we can see it and what it looks like and what it feels like. Yeah.
exactly.
So
That's why I do these pilgrimages, and so you can reach me on stargatetours.org and skywalkerhealings.com, and facebook.com/source avatar, or the Sungate or Skywalker Healings. And yeah, I love to connect and share more.
beautiful. I'd love to connect with you again and hear about more of your wonderful mystical experiences. And I think sharing these pieces are really important so everybody can, especially those who have not seen what's possible, to show what's possible. Because when we see what's on that next, possibility, then our minds can start imagining and creating and integrating that at a whole new level. And it's really beautiful. So thank you so much for being a vessel of the divine and for all
You're
your
welcome.
service and work. And
And thanks.
I'm so glad we finally got to talk. This is,
Yes.
the Christos in me sees and knows the Christos in you. So thank you so very much.
Welcome. Thank you as well.